Okay, we want to start off the week by taking a look at the United States Constitution, which is another founding document you're going to have to be very, very familiar with to start us off. Now, what I'm going to kind of do in this video is talk about like 7 themes that you'll see in our Constitution, and then I'll talk about some other assignments slash tasks if you want to do them would be beneficial to your learning. But before we even start with any of the big 7 themes of the Constitution, if you will, the best way, to learn the Constitution is to read it. All right, is to read it. And so, what I would say, if you're looking for a start, read this document. And I read it last night again. It took me all of 30 minutes to do, and it seems like it's long, but it's really not that long at all. But it's the best way to learn about the Constitution is to actually read it. And remember, this AP examination that we are going to take is a constitutional test. So the more you know this, the better you will be in your AP examination. But looking at themes of the Constitution, the first thing that I would say, and I didn't even put it up here, is one of the big ideas of the AP examination would always be like, how did the Constitution increase the power of the federal government? And we discussed that a little bit with the Brutus 1 document. We went over and reviewed that. So if you didn't hear that, go back and listen to that video. But ultimately, if you're ever in a bind with that, where it's asking you like some sort of open-ended question of how did the Constitution give new powers or an increase of power to the federal government, think back about the Articles of Confederation. And more importantly, think back about the weaknesses. Because everything that the Articles could not do for the federal government, the Constitution can do. Like, so for example, if the Articles of Confederation can't tax, then the Constitution can. If the Articles of Confederation can't regulate interstate trade, then the federal government underneath the Constitution can. So it's just a trick to learn. Now, what I would basically also say too is what you're looking for is when you're reading the documents is the 7 ideas are this, and I'll talk about each one a little. Popular sovereignty, federalism, republicanism, separation of powers, checks and balances, limited government, individual rights, and then I also kind of added down here a little bit of judicial review. Now, I'm going to leave a copy of these notes on the website, so feel free to download them, print them, and they would be a good learning resource for you. But we've talked about this before, popular sovereignty. A government by the people, for the people. A government that should serve the will of the people. A very prominent theme in our Constitution. Now, federalism we're going to talk about a little bit more later on. We start reviewing the individual content. But federalism is this idea that it's the division of power between the central and regional governments, all right? So you have the federal government and it has its powers. We did this with a Venn diagram in class. We have those enumerated or exclusive powers, powers given to the federal government only. And then on the right-hand side, we drew another part of the Venn diagram and said these are reserved powers. These are powers that the state has. And then in the middle, we had those concurrent powers, which are powers that they both share. So that federalism could become a prominent theme. Republicanism, also discussed in our Federalist 10 video, where we can't go and participate on every single level of our government in Washington, D.C. every day. Okay, we can't. We got jobs, we have hobbies, we have school, we have better things to do. So we pick people to represent us in Washington. These people should know what we want and should be working on behalf. So republicanism, rep, R-E-P, people represent us. Now, with separation of powers, another very prominent theme in our Constitution, you will notice when you start reading through the document that not all power is given to one group, all right? The 3 major powers of government, the ability to create laws, to enforce them, and to interpret them, have been split up, all right? And our government does it when they split it up with 3 separate branches, and each separate branch has its own power. Legislative creates laws. Executive enforces laws. Judicial interprets them. Now, in order to curb any kind of power, we also have checks and balances. So these are various tactics or powers, if you will, that can be used by one branch to stop the actions of another. So if the legislative branch passes a law that they think is great, well, a check is the president can veto that law if they feel if it's not so great. Or if the president tries to appoint a Supreme Court justice, well, then you have the check of the Senate being able to confirm that justice appointment or not. So there's many different ones. Be looking for them as you read through the document. And this idea of limited government, you will also notice that our government is limited, that all people fall under, even leaders fall under rule of law, that no one is above the law. Now, the big thing between the Anti-Federalists and Federalists is the Anti-Federalists saw scary things in the Constitution like the Necessary and Proper Clause, or the Supremacy Clause, or the ability to provide for the common offense or general welfare. And those things were scary because they were open-ended and they didn't know where they would end. But what Federalists will come back and say is, listen, this is a limited Constitution, okay? The powers that the Constitution has are here. You know, they're right here in front of you. They are listed, and we cannot go above and beyond these. We are subject to the law. So a very prominent theme too. And then last but not least, our individual rights, which we'll get to a lot when we talk about civil liberties and civil rights as well. But one thing I will say here before we and I won't forget judicial review at the end, is this. When you're reading through the Constitution, and please read the Constitution because we do have a lot of time on our hands to do that, is look for two examples of each, all right? Where can you find two examples of popular sovereignty, of federalism, of republicanism, separation of powers, checks and balances, limited government, and individual rights? Remember, most of the time the exam will ask you to list maybe two examples, but if you could go through the whole list and get like 3 or 4, that'd be wonderful. All right, you are not going to be downgraded for wrong information if you're listing various examples. All right, you can list 5 examples, hit on 2 of them, and you're still good to go on the exam. Now, last but not least, we'll talk about judicial review real quick, the ability of the courts to review legislation, actions of the presidents, bureaucratic rules. Those are all subject to law in the Constitution as well. And the Supreme Court, with the court case, Marbury versus Madison, made itself the ultimate arbiter of that idea. Now, here's what I want you to do. Read the Constitution. And like I said, it took me 30 minutes to do last night. Now, after you read the Constitution, or if you, while you are reading it, annotate it, okay? All right? Read these things, and if they don't make sense to you, then stop where you're at, copy the text, put it into a search, into Google, and figure out what these things mean. There's no better way of learning. So if you run into some language, you're like, I have no idea what this says, I'm not sure, take that language, put it into a Google search and put simplified or something, and it will tell you in plain language. It is the best way to learn the Constitution. And remember, this AP examination is a Constitution test. I'm going to also attach 2 constitutional scavenger hunts. If you would like to do those are really good activities. Maybe how I would do the constitutional scavenger hunt is I would try to do it all by myself without the help of the Constitution or internet. And then the ones that I'm missing or the ones I'm unsure about, I would go back and check. So I'm going to provide 2 examples of that. Feel free to do those. And then last but not least, I am also going to post review questions regarding the Constitution to AP Classroom. So remember to watch for those and do those. They can only help. All right. Once again, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, always feel free to reach out to me. I will be here. I will answer your questions promptly. And I do miss you guys, and I want to see you quickly, but do yourself a favor. In this break right now, take advantage of it. Study. All right. Until tomorrow, goodbye.